Hey, welcome back to Coaching Through the Bible. This week, the section called Bishalach, the nation on complaining. Our topic this week and our focus this week is complaining. We do it all the time. Multiple times a day, more often than we actually notice, we complain and complain and complain. There's no question that there is a lot to complain about. It's a tough time. There's a lot going on in the world. It's difficult. It's stressful. It's tense. There's anxiety. All kinds of reasons for people to complain. In fact, Dr. Robin Kowalski is a PhD and professor at Clemson University, said that complaining is just something we do. It's like breathing, though hopefully not as often. Having negative feelings is normal, it's healthy, it's even to the point where sharing those negative feelings with other people can create deeper relationships and bonding. But complaining can be a fairly destructive habit, but it's something that we do fairly often. We know people, all of us, who complain too much. At least we think they do. They probably think that we complain too much. I complain, certainly just like everybody else. And the people of Israel in this week's reading begin to complain. Sometimes warranted, sometimes unwarranted and unjustified, but understandably so. It's part of growth. It's part of becoming who we're supposed to be. But I recently heard a presentation by a gentleman by the name of Will Bowen, who I believe is a pastor in the Midwest. He called complaining a virus. It's a virus that spreads. It's a virus that has impact. It's a virus that has cost. And it's a virus. But it's something that is curable, something that we can work on and something that we can get through. And so when we look at the Bible and we read about the people of Israel and their complaining, it begins really for the first time this week in the immediate aftermath of their departure and their leaving of Egypt, and they're standing at the foot of the sea with no place to go. In that case, they are scared. Their complaint to Moses is actually not written as a complaint. They cry out, they scream out, they're afraid, they're fearful. They see Egypt running after them. They see Pharaoh and his horses and his henchmen coming after them. They have nowhere to go. They're stuck between a Pharaoh and a sea, and they lash out to some degree. But it happens to be that the Bible doesn't take them to task for having done so. It's an understandable thing that in that moment, in fear of their life, that they're going to put that out there, that it's a catastrophe waiting to happen, that they're in danger and they do not know what to do. And so they cry out. In the 14th chapter, in verse 10, the people cry out to God. They turn their attention to the right place, initially to God, then they go to Moses, and they say to Moses, were there not enough graves in Egypt for us to die there? Why would you take us out? This is what we told you. Better we stay there than to come out and to die in this way. And Moses responds in kind and says, just stand there and watch what's about to happen. And so it's a normal moment of distress, and their complaint, want to call it whatever you want to call it, is a legitimate complaint. And in fact, the Torah, the Bible, does not actually call it and use the term for complaining there, which it does actually use later on. In chapter 15, verse 24, the people have now crossed the sea. They have come out. They have sung the song. It's been an incredible moment, and now they have no water. In verse 24, it tells us that the people complained unto Moses, what shall we drink? And so the wording is interesting. There, it's not simply that they made a request of Moses to find water. There they complain. It's the first time that the Bible uses the term for complaining. The Hebrew word is vayilonu, the root of which is about leaning on or laying down in front of. And so they lean on to Moses. What shall we drink? Moses then turns to God and he asks God for help, and God helps him. and they're able to sweeten the waters. But it's the first time that they complain. And there's a whole variety of understandings and nuance in the language that the Bible uses to describe this complaint, to understand what's going on here. Perhaps they should have prayed. Perhaps it should have been a more simple request up the chain of communication. The people going to their leaders, going to Moses, and simply making a request that says, we need water. But once it's a complaint, it comes with a different emotional attachment. It comes with additional level of stress. It comes out differently. We hear it differently. And it's a complaint. But it happens to be that in this case, it's not an issue for God. He accepts their complaint. He accepts their need to have and desire water. And he gives them water. Uses it a teachable moment for them. But it's not the last time. They then complain again later on in chapter 16 with respect to the food. They complain there. And then again, towards the end of the reading for this week, they complain again about water. And that's the first time when Moses hits the rock. There they're complaining again. In each situation, the differences in nuance in the language, and take a look at all the differences in them, one will come across interesting changes in the way that Moses reacts, in the way that God responds, in the way that the people themselves are speaking. And it's all in the context of complaining. And so we complain a lot. And so I was reading this week articles and listening to presentations by a gentleman by the name of Jack Canfield. Jack Canfield is a well-known success coach in the United States. Many of you know him from his well-known books, beginning with the words Chicken Soup for the whatever. So Chicken Soup for the Soul is Jack Canfield, and the other chicken soup related books. And so he has this idea with respect to complaining, which is something that we do, and how do we work on our complaining? It sounds similar to a lot of what we've talked about in other weeks. But there is a practice that we can have with respect to our complaining that can really help us. And so what he describes is the following. Every situation that we're in life is an event plus our response, which leads to an outcome. So there is E plus R equal O. Event plus response equal outcome. We don't control the event necessarily. It's something that's happening to us. But we can impact the outcome by virtue of our response. It's the part of it that we control. And so what do we do? How do we do something about it? We have to first realize that when we're complaining in that situation, is it a situation that we can change or not? Because if it's not a situation that we can change, then the complaint is one of three different types in total in terms of complaining. There is what we can call venting, which I think a lot of us know well. We simply just want to get it out there. We can call it the chronic complaining, which is another kind of complaining. Or there's something that's called instrumental complaining, which we'll spend a moment on in just a minute. Because it's important to sort of appreciate what kind of complaint we are lodging at this moment. We talked in the past often about the sphere of influence or our locus of control. And so we have to sort of consider in this moment when we're about to complain, do I have an opportunity to control this moment, to control this situation? And if I do, then I should take action. And if I don't, then what am I doing? Am I becoming a chronic complainer? Am I putting on what are called the muddy glasses? Right? We talk often about rose-colored glasses, but there's also muddy glasses. The muddy glasses are the glasses that the chronic complainer is wearing because everything is bleak and dirty and dark and messy and ugly, and that is the space where a chronic complainer lives. And so we have to sort of come around the idea of what's happening in that event, in that moment that's requiring our response, and our response being a complaint, because we must also appreciate, which is super important, and this is part of when we coach on this subject, what's happening in our brain and in our mind when we complain. Because when we complain, we are changing our brain. And when we stop complaining, or we soothe our complaints, or when we begin to move our actions and our behaviors and our thought processes in the direction of not complaining, of perhaps appreciating as a different approach, we are improving our brain. We are rewiring our brain. One way to the negative in the complaints, two to the positive. We're also rewiring the people around us because there's an impact around the people who we hang out with and spend our time with. If we're a chronic complainer, or we're someone who was what's called a catastrophizer, that's legitimately a word, someone who always sees everything in the worst possible light, everything is a tragedy and a catastrophe. So then we are rewiring not only our own brains to the negative, but those are the people around us as well. And I think ultimately we'll find that we'll have less people that are around us. And so we need to sort of think about what's happening to us when we're complaining, and what we need to do to sort of change that approach. We obviously know that happier people complain less, or as some perhaps suggest that people who complain less are happier. There is a way to sort of look at it for both ways. But it's also true that people who are happy also complain. They just complain less often and perhaps more strategically. And so when we think about the complaints, what we need to do is the following thing. And I want to put this out there as a challenge. Let's take a 7-day challenge, right? If we're going to coach these situations and try to really help ourselves and help each other with this, let's take a 7-day complaining challenge to either become someone who complains less often, or at least when we're complaining to be more strategic in our complaints. So the 7-day challenge works as follows. Every time we complain, write it down. Just mark it down somewhere. Put it in your phone. Write it on a piece of paper. Notice that you are going to complain. Before then issuing that complaint, in whatever context, breathe first. If we're going to call someone to complain, if we're going to text someone to complain, breathe first. Take a moment to consider what we're about to complain about and why we're complaining. Again, write down the complaint. Put it down. Create for yourself a notepad or a location where you can put this stuff down. For myself, I have a WhatsApp group for myself. It's called Remind Me, and it's just for me. And therein, I put in some of these thoughts, things that I'm thinking. Sometimes a lot of it's just simply ideas, but on occasion, it's simply just a basic complaint. I want to issue a complaint. I want to vent. I want to put it out there. So I put it down first. And then remind yourself that you have a choice. How do I want to respond in this moment? Can I, even if I want to complain and ultimately will complain, can I complain in a what I'll call a more instrumental and problem-solving and strategic and more constructive manner? Or will I simply just be a venter, someone who needs to what's called expressive complain, who just wants to put it out there? We can appreciate why that is. People who are expressively complaining, who are venting, understandably are attention-seeking. They're looking for validation. They are not looking for solutions. But perhaps we can be more, successful, let's say, with our complaining if we're looking at it instrumentally, as the term is used, which is the idea that we're trying to solve the issue, which is, as the studies say, less than 25% of the complaints are lodged in that manner. But what we get here is this idea that complaining isn't going away. Complaining isn't something that we're going to get rid of completely. Complaining is something that we can reduce, something that we can channel into a more positive approach, either a more positive form of complaining or more positively in general by simply flipping our complaints over and being more appreciative and more filled with gratitude in a moment when obviously there's a lot that's negative around us and worthy of complaining. And so let's try to sort of go about the 7-day challenge. You can text me or WhatsApp me, not all your complaints, but that you're going to participate with me in the 7-day challenge to see if we can reduce our complaining and get happier. Really pay attention to be more mindful. Mindful is something we've talked a lot about, really paying attention to what we're doing, stopping for a moment before we do things to really think through what it is that we're doing. So let's take that 7-day challenge and let me know that you're going to participate wherever it is that you are, listening to this, or you get the link to this podcast, whether that's through WhatsApp or that's on Facebook or, LinkedIn or Twitter, wherever it's posted, or you subscribe, which I appreciate. And let's take this challenge, see if we can become happier people by complaining less, by being more aware of our complaints, by being more constructive with our complaining. And then ultimately on the other side of that, as we come into next week, we'll talk about a different kind of interesting subject too. We'll come out of it and come into a space where we've gotten rid of this virus, the complaining virus, and we're much happier, much more healthy people at that time. Okay, have a great weekend. Have a great coming week. See you next week on Coaching Through the Bible.